Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Martyred City, the Smyrna Catastrophe, Remembrance of the Christian Hellenic Genocide panel discussion. It is hosted by EMBCA, the East Mediterranean Business Culture Alliance, in association with the Order of AHEPA, Hellenic Cultural Commission, and AHEPA's Empire District Number 6. My name is Lou Katsos, and I am the president of EMBCA and the chairman of AHEPA's Hellenic Cultural Commission, and also the governor of District 6. The title of the Remembrance, the Martyred City, is taken from George Horton's poem by the same title from his famous book, The Blight of Asia, and his eyewitness account of the burning of Smyrna. He called his poem The Martyred City because there were Christian martyrs in the early Christian period in Smyrna, and also the Archbishop or Metropolitan of Smyrna was martyred during September of 1922, where he was torn apart by fanatics in Smyrna. We are honored today and privileged to have as our presenters Professor Nikos Michailidis, Dr. Peter Stavranindis, and Professor Ismini. I'm going to give just a brief overview in terms of the Smyrna catastrophe and the genocide in general before I introduce the presenters formally. The Smyrna catastrophe, known in Greek as the Catastrophe tis Smyrnis, which happened 98 years ago, refers to the deliberately set fire 4 days after the Turkish forces entered and captured the port city of cosmopolitan Smyrna in Asia Minor, and which completely destroyed its Hellenic and Armenian quarters. It was the culmination of the Turco-Hellenic War of 1919 to 1922, and the fire was started on September 13th and extinguished on September 22nd in 1922. Turkish soldiers, per eyewitnesses, systematically cordoned off the ports and the quay to contain Hellenes and Armenians within the fire zone quarters and prevented them from fleeing. The estimated Hellenic and Armenian deaths resulting from the fire range up to 100,000 lost souls, and approximately up to 400,000 Hellenic and Armenian refugees, which headed towards the city as the Turkish troops were approaching from other parts of Asia Minor, were crammed into the waterfront and the docks to escape the horrific fires. Women were raped, and tens of thousands of Hellenic and Armenian men were subsequently deported into the interior of Anatolia, where many died in harsh and brutal conditions. After the Smyrna catastrophe, the Hellenic city, founded 3,000 years before, a jewel of the Eastern Mediterranean, ceased to have Hellenic residents. During the period of 1913 to 1922, and the numbers vary, about 900,000 Greeks, 750,000 Assyrians, and 1,800,000 Armenians were exterminated. The targeted Hellenic population were particularly or primarily from Pontus, Cappadocia, Ionia, and East Thrace. The responsible parties included the Young Turks, or Committee of Union and Progress, and various pasas of the time. Foreign aid was provided by the Relief Committee for Greeks in Asia Minor and the American Committee for Relief in the Near East. The Greek genocide, including the Pontic genocide, was the systematic killing of Christian Ottoman Greek population carried out in Anatolia during World War I and its aftermath on the basis of their religion and ethnicity. It was instigated by the government of the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish national movement. against the indigenous Greek population of the empire. It included massacres, forced deportations involving death marches, summary expulsions, arbitrary executions, and cultural genocide in the destruction of the Eastern Orthodox cultural, historical, and religious monuments. According to various sources, several 100,000 Ottoman Greeks died during this period. And as I said, some figures equated to almost 900,000. Many, of course, fled. Many of the survivors fled to Greece, adding over a quarter of the prior population of Greece by those refugees. And some, especially in the eastern provinces, took refuge in neighboring Russia. By the late 1922, most of the Greeks of Asia Minor had fled or had been killed. Those remaining were transferred to Greece under the terms of the later population exchange between Greece and Turkey. I would be remiss not to mention that today is September 6th, and it's the day of the start of the Istanbul Program. The Istanbul Program were organized mob attacks directed primarily at Istanbul's or Constantinople's Hellenic minority on September 6th and 7th in 1955. And again, this is important because although we talk about a genocide that many people are calling the 30-year genocide, starting in 1894 and going to 1924, remember that certain circumstances continued to happen. One of them was obviously the Istanbul Program. The other one was the invasion of Cyprus, where Turkish troops still occupy a third of the island. Many of the issues that we're going to be discussing today with regards to the genocide are things that have happened during those particular time periods of the Istanbul Program in 1955, and also obviously that happened in Cyprus. What I'd like to do now is introduce our first presenter, Professor Nikos Michailidis. Dr. Michailidis is a sociocultural anthropologist in the anthropology department of the University of Missouri in St. Louis, specializing in political anthropology. His broad research interests are arts and politics, ethnicity, Hellenic cultural heritage in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea, social memory, material culture, humans and technology, political theory, social movements, cultural diplomacy, and soft power. He is currently working on a book monograph about music and ethnic identities in northeastern Turkey to be published by the Indiana University Press. The book analyzes the revival of Pontic Greek music in contemporary Turkey, its ethnic and socio-political repercussions. He has presented papers in various academic conferences and written articles in edited volumes in Greece. He will be speaking on remembering genocide, securing democracy, and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. Welcome, Nico, and please start.
Dear Lou, thank you very, very much for your kind invitation. And I want to thank the organizers of this amazing event. Today, I'm going to talk about the possible connections between the act of remembering, of social and personal memory, and political regimes and political culture. Because usually, I'm not a historian, so obviously I'm not going to talk about the historical events, but I'm very interested as an anthropologist to think and understand how remembering the past connects to contemporary political culture, especially in the context of modern Turkey, and how collective or social or cultural memory, however we want to name it, how it connects to processes of democratization and transformation of those political cultures of violence and persecution. So the right to vote is of course critical in various democracies, as we all know, but it is not enough to define a regime as a democracy, right? A really democratic legal structure ensures basic human rights and freedoms associated with religion, ethnic identity, political expression, and peaceful assembly, of course, among others, for each citizen. A closer look at Turkish history makes it clear that the citizens of Turkey who were born into non-Muslim or non-Turkish families have never fully had those rights and freedoms. For decades, they have been exposed to systematic persecution and even murderous attacks. Today, only 0.2% of Turkish population is Christian or Jewish, whereas 100 years ago, we had millions of Christians and tens of thousands of Jewish people. Today, it's only 0.2%. In the absence of non-Muslim minorities, the Turkish governments now target and oppresses other Turks, mainly of non-Islamic secular Turks and Gulenist Muslims, sympathizers of the cleric Fethullah Gulen, a former ally of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who currently resides in the United States, in Pennsylvania. International media is filled with reports about the Turkish government's targeting, arresting, repressing, dismissing, and in some cases, torturing of ethnic Turks. Many cases of torturing. Attacks against Turkish Muslim citizens of Turkey are actually standard practice by the Turkish government. The difference now is who is on the receiving end. Moreover, there is a deliberate attempt to change the demographic balances and to completely marginalize the Kurdish population in the predominantly Kurdish districts of southeastern Turkey. Let me share a few more information regarding this contemporary situation about Turkey before we make the connection with the past. More than 500,000 citizens from the Kurdish region have been displaced in the last 3 or 4 years, and many thousands have been killed. Between July 2015 and December 2016, several majority Kurdish cities in southeastern Turkey were subjected to around-the-clock curfews by the Turkish government. The curfews were accompanied by military assaults against civilian populations, their homes, businesses, offices, historical monuments, reservoirs, and infrastructure were bombed and destroyed. And recently, I don't know if you are following the developments in Turkey, in the last couple of months, all the Kurdish or the elected Kurdish mayors from the Kurdish majority regions have been dismissed. Some of them have been imprisoned, and they were replaced by mayors that were chosen by the government, by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, basically. However, most of the ethnic Turkish citizens still fail to grasp the fact that Turkey's historical and current crimes against other populations, Greeks, Armenians, Assyrians, Jews, Kurds, and Yazidis, as well as the silence of much of the Turkish Muslim majority, have created the ever-authoritarian, oppressive, and anti-democratic regime of Turkey. Even 95 years later, or maybe 100 years later, many citizens of Turkey are not well informed and still not show any sign of regret, shame, or guilt for all those incidents. And this is because of a certain political culture of denial, as many scholars describe it, a political culture of denial, historical distortion, and aggression that has been cultivated by state authorities for many, many decades. According to common Turkish state propaganda, the Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrians were not victims of Turkish state persecution. Instead, the citizens of Turkey are taught that these people were mass murderers, rapists, and plunderers. They are taught that Greeks and Armenians cooperated with the so-called imperialists to destroy and divide the Ottoman Empire, the fatherland of the Turks. This propaganda portrays Sunni Muslim Turks as victims, as oppressed people who had every right to revolt against their oppressors, the Greeks and the Armenians, who finally got what they deserved, extermination. In such a mentality, the fact that Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrian Christians are the indigenous people of Anatolia is of little value. Turkey's mainstream political culture and the people who are indoctrinated with it believe that they are the only permanent and dominant rulers of the lands they conquered or they started conquering in the 11th century. According to official Turkish rhetoric, the victims are perpetrators and the perpetrators are victims. The natives are invaders and the invaders are natives. The oppressed are the oppressors and the oppressors become the oppressed. Everything is turned upside down. State-sponsored history books direct their own citizens to view specific groups as their own enemy. In addition, they define or they describe the so-called Pontic Greek problem as a major threat to national security and urge Turkish youth to be vigilant against this threat. And when they talk about, in Turkey, when they talk about the so-called Pontic Greek problem, they are actually talking about the rising activism in recent years on behalf of many Pontian Greeks around the world for the recognition of the genocide from Kemalists and Young Turks. Sadly, Turkey not only denies the Pontic Greek and Christian genocides in general, it also puts the blame on the victims. The widespread propaganda about history fed to the Turkish citizens at schools, in the media and elsewhere gives many of them a false sense of supremacy and paves the way for further crimes against other groups like the Kurds and the Alevis, as we see today. The distortion of historical facts regarding the genocide legitimizes an aggressive political culture and violent militarist practices in the present. This phenomenon, the strong interconnection between understandings of history, the ways we know about the past, the things we know and we reproduce about the past, on the one hand, and political practices in the present, has been thoroughly documented in the international literature and bibliography by many social scientists around the world. Imagine what Germany would look like today if it hadn't recognized and condemned the Holocaust. Imagine what kind of a Germany we would have if Nazi ideology was still mainstream today in the German society. To make the parallel, in Turkey, young Turkish nationalist ideology and Kemalist ideology, now mixed with a peculiar form of Islamic nationalism, they are very, very mainstream in the country. People who vote for these kinds of political parties are more than 75%. The Turkish official narrative that distorts historical facts and turns the victims into perpetrators and perpetrators into victims destroys the ability of many Turkish citizens to establish empathy with people of other ethnic or religious groups. Today, many ethnic Turks are being victimized by their own repressive regime. Sadly, the Turks who oppose the Turkish government are now confronted with their own annihilation by their own Turkish brothers and sisters. Throughout the decades, it was the same atmosphere and the same hatred with public threats and violence, but it was directed at Christians, Jews, and Kurds. This was what drove many non-Muslims out of Turkey. It was not possible for non-Muslim or non-Turkish citizens of Turkey to live under constant threat and to not know where to get any justice, because the government was behind the hatred and was directing it, actually. Now it has also turned against ethnic Turks, as I said, because they are not considered Islamic enough and because they do not support the Erdogan regime. As long as the Turkish people do not honestly face their history and take steps to secure justice for and show solidarity with all victims of the successive Turkish regimes throughout the 20th century, they seem to be bound to live under an oppressive regime, which is as oppressive as former Turkish regimes in the 50s and 60s and even before that. In Turkey, the victims change, but the destructive nature of the regime unfortunately remains the same. And this is the tragic history of Asia Minor throughout the 20th century. And this is a history that we usually do not discuss, or we fail to make the connections with the previous tragic events in the beginning of the 20th century and late 19th with the Greek genocide. Mainstream political culture has been shaped by a denialist narrative of the past that rejects the genocidal violence inflicted upon the Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire. Turkish authorities spent millions of dollars in the United States and elsewhere to sustain and promote this official position. This denial also legitimates Turkish state aggression and political violence in the present. And as long as the Turkish state fails to recognize the past and accept the mass violence it exercised against its Christian subjects, current violent practices against other vulnerable populations will go unchallenged. For this reason, Turkey cannot become truly democratic as long as the mass violence and atrocities committed, such as the genocide of the early 20th century, are not addressed and sincerely confronted in both Turkish state and society in the context of academia, mass media, etc., etc. Thus, those who are really interested in the prospect of democracy and prosperity for all the people of Anatolia, the respect of international law and human rights, and peaceful coexistence and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean, we should all join forces to push the Turkish state to recognize the genocide committed against Pontic Greeks and other Christians of Anatolia. And I'm really optimistic because I see many young, educated citizens of Turkey who are supporting those demands, and they are standing next to our own demands, and they are on our side. And I'm sure that most of you are following the current developments in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm going to say this and stop talking. This idea that many bureaucrats and military officers and politicians currently in Turkey have about themselves, the idea that they are a superpower, that they should control the whole of Eastern Mediterranean and everybody should be subjugated to their own ideas and political control, relates to this political culture of violence and supremacy that I was trying to talk about. And it is this political culture that we need to deconstruct, to criticize, to dissolve, in order to create a peaceful and democratic Anatolia that will benefit the whole region. And in order to achieve this, we need to change the way people of Anatolia think about their past, and recognition of genocides and other violent crimes is a very important dimension of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico, for that presentation. Our next speaker will be Dr. Peter Stavranindis. Dr. Stavranindis is an educator and community leader. He is a successful entrepreneur and has been active in the Hellenic American community, holding numerous leadership posts with organizations connected with Hellenic issues of the diaspora and the genocide of Asia Minor. As a passionate political activist and the lobbyist for Hellenic and Pontian issues, he has been instrumental in unanimously passing of a resolution in the state legislature of New Jersey in 2006, urging Turkey to respect the rights and religious freedoms of the ecumenical patriarch. He is the past president of the Pan-Pontian Federation of the US and Canada. Peter has a passion for education, teaching as an adjunct professor and conducting research on the history of the Greek Jews in conjunction with the Pantheon University of Greece. He is an archon of the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle. He will be speaking today on the destruction of Smyrna and the end of Hellenism in Asia Minor. Welcome, Peter, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lou. And most of the credit, all the credit actually goes to you. And you manage always to put these panels together. Let me start by saying that the Asian Minor Catastrophe has been for many decades a topic which is quite unpleasant and unresolved, not only in the minds of the pundits of the political, academic, and diplomatic circles, but also in the hearts and souls of the contemporary Hellenes, especially the descendants of the hundreds of thousands of victims that were massacred during that horrific era. And I happen to be one of those descendants. The demise of the millions of the Christian populations that inhabited Anatolia and the coasts of Ionia left a big vacuum, which in the years to follow has been gradually developed into a very densely populated area, becoming a gruesome and strategic arm of a neighbor that keeps on reminding us with its aggressive actions and intimidating rhetoric that only if you command both coasts of the Aegean, you can claim ownership to the Aegean archipelago. But before I even touch upon who were the main actors that contributed to the events and how it happened, I will start with the why. The first why is that the ambitious military expedition against Turkey, a little over 100 years from the March 25th revolution, finds Greece in a much different situation. Greece has undergone major expansion from the skillful diplomatic, military, and strategic alliances against Turkey and Bulgaria during the Balkan Wars, and finds itself on the side of the victors and has more than double its territory. That's number one. Number two, the victorious powers of Entente had already decided the disintegration of the sick man, as Turkey was called during, actually the Ottoman Empire was called from the middle of the 19th century. Number three, Greece found itself at the end of World War I on the side of the winners, and plus its military forces had not suffered any heavy losses during that period. Just keep in mind that Greece didn't enter the war until 1917. And number four, the 2 million Greeks that lived in Asia Minor had undergone a systematic ethnic cleansing or genocide, to use the more contemporary term, and Greece had a very strong motive to intervene. Under these unique circumstances, it would be politically and militarily a tremendous mistake for Greece to remain idle. The only huge question that historians, political scientists, and sociologists would be called time after time to give an answer is why Venizelos decided, in the midst of the winning theater of military operations of the Asia Minor campaign, to declare elections. Why? We believe that this hasty decision to enter into such dire straits during those crucial moments was the beginning of the decline. Who are Venizelos' opponents? The Royalist Communist Alliance and the new citizens of the kingdom, which are the ethnic citizens of the new lands. There was a consideration in 1915 about Hellenic territorial presence in Asia Minor, but the true opportunity arises in May 1919, when the leaders of the great powers, Lloyd George, Clemenceau, and Wilson of the US, asked Greece to embark on a military campaign that would annex Smyrna to prevent its intended annexation by the Italians. So Venizelos, very rightfully so, grabs the opportunity and goes to Ionia as an agent of Entente. The ultimate result of this action was, of course, to complete a permanent annexation of this area. Now, the gain of this action would be securing the complete domination of the Aegean, being the sole proprietor of both coasts and the protection of the hundreds of thousands of Greeks and Armenians that lived in Ionia. It has been repeatedly suggested that the decision of the victorious powers to take advantage of their situation and dismember the Ottoman Empire into pieces had the imperialistic tendencies and was frowned upon by some of the actors of the geopolitical scene, especially the Bolsheviks, who in 1919 crashed any opposition and took over. And not only that, but they struck a peace accord with Germany and started helping Kemal's movement against the Greek military, and they also provided Kemal with gold and military supplies. We also have to look at the differing schools of thought that existed in the Athenian politics, and I should include in those figures that were against Venizelos. One of them was Ion Dragoumis, but the most serious of the skeptics was Ioannis Metaxas, who was diametrically opposed to such a campaign, promoting his theory that the military changes to be met could not be overcome, and such an event would be an act of colonialism. Just prior to the Treaty of the Servers, the Greek military campaign made some impressive victories against Kemal's troops. Even Winston Churchill, who was against Lloyd George's policies in Asia Minor, expressed how impressed he was with the Hellenic victories. But it is 1919 now, and we're looking at Kemal's revolutionary army. It doesn't seem to be a match to the Hellenic divisions that keep on winning battle after battle. So since May 1919, Venizelos, with these victories, has convinced the British to supply the Greeks with military equipment and finance this initiative. But events happen that unfortunately we don't have the time to go through in detail, which proves that the British become quite reluctant to accept Venizelos' radical proposals. And the new elections bring to power a government that is pro-monarchy, pro-German, and for sure, diametrically opposed to Venizelos' vision, who in the meantime decides to bow out from the political scene into a self-exile. The results were dramatic. The new government managed to break away from the coalition of the allies. Ioannis Metaxas, who is the Venizelos' most fierce political opponent, contributed immensely to the defeat of the Anatolian front. What is the conclusion? Greece, even today, is seeking desperately to find accountability for the Asia Minor catastrophe and the share of this accountability among the monarchists, the Venizelists, and the communists. One would think that these are issues which should have been resolved decades ago by contemporary Greek historiography. On the contrary, they continue to exist and prohibit the neo-Hellenes to set history straight. So you're bound to hear opinions like, we had no business in Smyrna, or either way, Smyrna would have been lost eventually. However, the apologists of these views disregard the geopolitical realities that without being in charge of the Ionian coast, those Aegean islands close by will always be in danger, with a questionable future as long as our aggressive neighbor remains the local bully. I mean, we can see that clearly today, and I'm sure you all agree with that. Finally, one of the issues that also still remains in darkness is whether the execution of the 6 who were held responsible for the tragic events in Anatolia were actually guilty or not. Today, with a rapid increase in economy and population, Turkey has been transformed from a nation of Asia to a nation of the Aegean, looking for political and military access to the Mediterranean, being asphyxiated by the Greek islands, breathing in her face. Unfortunately, the actors of the strategy could not conceive at the time the consequences of their destructive policies that caused this devastating defeat. Every tragedy of this magnitude usually ends up in some kind of a catharsis, and the execution of the 6 was the main ingredients of this catharsis. So with the destruction of Smyrna, we come to the end of Hellenism in Asia Minor, which in my view is the third biggest dramatic event in the history of Hellenism. And I would say the first event is the end of the Peloponnesian War and the end of the 2 great cities of Athens and Sparta. Of course, the fall of Constantinople, and last and not really least, the destruction of Smyrna, the end of Hellenism in Asia Minor. The British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, describing this tragic event, wrote, "Every tragedy is a mixture of mistakes and misadventures. Never before was this phenomenon being better depicted more fully than the Greek misfortune of this war." And of course, this brought the great idea, the Megali Idea, according, of course, to Venizelos' vision. This event brought this great idea to the end. Thank you so much.
Peter, thank you for that. Our next presenter is Dr. Ismini Lam. Professor Ismini Lam is the director of the Modern Greek Program in the Department of Classics at Georgetown, where she teaches all levels of the modern Greek language and a wide variety of interdisciplinary courses on Greek culture, including courses on media and film, Byzantine history and civilization, the Orthodox faith, and Greek business culture. She is also a C.S. Lewis Fellow. Her research interests includes the influence of political ethos and media on Greek national identity and expression, modern Greek recognition studies, national and ecumenical Hellenism, and social and humanitarian issues in contemporary Greece, particularly with the advent of the financial and refugee crisis. She is writing a biography on the American Philhellene, classicist, author, diplomat, ethnographer, and humanitarian activist George Horton. Our presentation will be on correcting 3 more misconceptions about the 1922 Smyrna catastrophe. Both Ismini and Peter spoke last year at our Remembrance at the 3 West Club, entitled at that time, Burnt Offerings and Whispered Voices, the Smyrna Catastrophe. And during that particular time, and going back to what was discussed earlier by Nikos, there was serious conflict taking place with various Turkish American organizations that tried to prevent Ismini from speaking that particular day. And we are fortunate and happy that Georgetown defended her. And she is with us today to continue to discuss the misconceptions of the 1922 Smyrna Catastrophe. Welcome, Ismini, and thank you for coming here today.
Well, thank you, Lou, for asking me to be part of this distinguished panel. Well, last year, as Lou said, my presentation was entitled Correcting 3 Popular Misconceptions About the 1922 Smyrna Catastrophe. Today, I'm building on that and correcting 3 additional misconceptions. But first, allow me to make a couple of introductory points. First, my views on Smyrna stem from the biographical research I'm doing on George Horton, an American diplomat. I am seeing things through his eyes, his lens. Horton spent 8 years in Smyrna as the American consul, and he was present when the Turkish army burned the city in 1922. In my presentation this afternoon, I will try to demonstrate that we can still learn a lot from Horton, his life, and his insights. The second point I would like to make is that I believe the best, most recent scholarship supports Horton's views. Last year, I emphasized 2 important sources that substantiate Horton: a book covering declassified German Foreign Office archives by Gust, and another by 2 Israeli scholars, Morris and Zivi. These sources validate the point that all the previous presenters made, Lou and Peter and Nikos, and that Horton also made in his 1927 book, The Blight of Asia, namely that Turkey pursued a consistent policy of ethnic cleansing and genocide against these Christian minorities for more than 30 years. Today, I want to highlight 2 more outstanding scholarly works. Both are underappreciated doctoral dissertations from British universities. Victoria Solomonidis' Greece in Asia Minor is one of the first histories based on access to the Smyrna High Commission archives. Also, Eleftheria Deleziou's Britain and the Greek-Turkish War and Settlement of 1919-1923 is one of the first histories based on declassified British documents. Now, I firmly believe future works on Smyrna will rely heavily upon these amazing pieces of research. These and other sources indicate modern scholarship is finally catching up with Horton and substantiating his views on Smyrna. For those who want to explore more of those sources and more deeply, I believe that EMBCA will put them up on the website along with my comments later on. With that, let me jump into the first popular misconception. Last year, I explained the Greek occupation of Smyrna was not, and I repeat, was not an act of aggression. It was duly authorized by Allied leaders, consistent with norms of war termination, and in accord with the terms of Turkish surrender. And what's more, it was codified in the armistice agreement Turkey signed. Today, allow me to build upon that point and assert that what is commonly referred to as the Greco-Turkish War was actually a continuation of World War I. Now, Horton made this point in a letter to a Michigan classmate just months before Smyrna was burned. He told his friends he could not attend their class reunion because he was, quote, superintending the tailing off of the World War, which is still going on here. Historians often categorize conflicts by the purpose of the fighting. The Allies promulgated their reasons for waging war, listing one major goal as, and I quote, the liberation of the people who now lie beneath the murderous tyranny of the Turks and the expulsion from Europe of the Ottoman Empire, which has proved itself so radically alien to Western civilization. The fighting in Anatolia after World War II was an effort to fulfill this Allied objective, which I just quoted. Instead of doing the job themselves, however, the exhausted British, French, and Americans sent the Greeks to enforce peace terms. Now, in fairness to these allies, they were preoccupied with Germany still. People forget that Allied forces had to threaten a renewed attack on Germany in order to get its leaders to sign the Versailles Treaty. Allied forces also occupied the Rhineland in early 1923 to force Germany to pay reparations in compliance with treaty terms. And similarly, the Allies used the Greeks to force Turkish compliance with the peace treaty Turkey signed. But as George Horton famously predicted in the summer of 1919, the Allied use of Greece to shoulder the entire burden of peace enforcement in Anatolia was doomed to failure. In fact, you call it another Syracusan expedition and a failure, referring to the Peloponnesian War famous expedition. So the so-called Greco-Turkish War was, in fact, a result of differences over World War I peace terms, or if you prefer, a failed peace enforcement operation. Why is this important? Why are we even discussing it? Because it highlights the purpose of the fighting. The Turks who disagreed with the peace treaty were fighting in order to hold on to as much of Anatolia and their former empire as possible and to make their dominions religiously homogeneous. On the other hand, the Greeks were fighting to enforce the peace treaties, protect Christian minorities, and they hoped to set the stage for eventually extending Greek rule over Greek-dominated portions of Ionia. Greece did not invade Turkey. Greece volunteered to enforce peace terms Turkey was violating after, and I repeat, after the major Allied powers declined to do so. Now, the second popular misconception I would like to address concerns the nature of the Greek administration of the Smyrna district from 1919 to 1922. The Greek administration was not repressive and regressive as depicted in some quarters, but rather liberal and progressive, and incredibly so, given the circumstances. As I noted last year, a false narrative emerged on the subject of the Greek landing in Smyrna, and both Peter again and Nikos alluded to that. The fighting was instigated by the Turks and the casualties were low, but the Turks turned the event into a propaganda coup. As Greek forces tried to restore the Turks waged guerrilla warfare. Some Greeks terrorized by the Turks before and during World War I did seek revenge. Yet, authoritative scholarship concludes Turkish atrocities were widespread and horrific compared to isolated cases of Greek atrocities. Most tellingly, in fact, the Greek authorities punished those committing heinous acts while Turkish authorities rewarded them. In fact, Morris and Zevi conclude, quote, the most murderous Turks received the greatest rewards from Kemal Ataturk. Well, this year, I want to go even further and assert, as Horton did, that on the whole, the Greek administration was beneficial for Greeks and Turks alike. In an early 1920 dispatch, Horton cited a British intelligence officer who noted that the Muslim population was sick of the Turkish irregulars who took their money and food. He wrote, Turks do not like Greeks, and I quote, Turks do not like Greeks, but they prefer the latter to Muslim bands, and many Turks are crossing the border into Greek-occupied territory. Turks are not being maltreated by the Greeks as the Hellenic officers have strict orders to control their troops in this respect. Horton himself said that he could substantiate the British officer's statements from personal observation in the country and from other reliable sources. Later, in his book, The Blight of Asia, Horton concluded that, quote, despite many difficulties, the Greek civil authorities, as far as their influence extended, succeeded in giving Smyrna and a large portion of the occupied territory the most orderly, civilized, and progressive administration that it has had in historic times. Now, Solomonidis' dissertation also makes a good case for the progressive nature of the Greek administration, so it's worth looking into. In discussing atrocities and the Greek administration, I want to make it clear that the differences in Greek and Turkish behavior were to a great extent political. Yes, a case can be made that cultural factors played a role as well, but the major difference was the contrasting goals of the two groups. Greek leaders on one side wanted to convince the world that the Greek administration in Ionia was a positive development. Hence, they made strenuous efforts to woo the Turkish population. Horton and other independent observers note the Greek administration was tougher on Greeks than Turks. The Turkish leaders, on the other hand, wanted something quite different. They were trying to force the Turkish population to support their guerrilla warfare and to eliminate the Christian presence in Anatolia. To this end, the Turkish authorities organized genocide and ethnic cleansing. Now, the third popular misconception concerns the legitimacy of exploring these issues. Many seem to believe that revisiting such sad topics and trying to correct the historical record is counterproductive. I could not disagree more. I believe a historically accurate understanding of what happened and why facilitates better, more peaceful relations between Greece and Turkey and for the region as a whole. Thus, today I want to build on the point I made last year, that is, pursuing historical truth is not equivalent to anti-Turkish bigotry. And I would like to assert that it is in Turkey's self-interest to embrace freedom of speech as a bedrock civil liberty and to own up to its genocide of native Christians, because doing so moves the Turkish people closer to the benefits of an open society. George Horton himself made this argument. From the beginning, he tried to combat the effort to whitewash what took place in Smyrna. He believed the community of nations would regret rewarding Turkey for genocide and ethnic cleansing. Horton was not an anti-Turkish bigot. He was a humanitarian who throughout his career befriended and helped Muslims, including Turks, as my biography will demonstrate. Beyond that fact, ad hominem attacks are illogical, as the ancient Greeks long ago observed. If you believe in truth, you need to address the substance of the argument rather than attacking the person making it. Blackguarding Horton as a bigot rather than addressing his arguments is just another attempt to sidetrack the pursuit of truth. We need to remember that all social science rule of thumb. Good description is a necessary foundation for good explanation, and good explanation is a prerequisite for effective prescription. If we do not understand what happened, it is hard to understand why it happened, and thus hard to formulate effective prescriptions for what should happen in the future. How nations embrace the pursuit of truth is a primary indicator of whether they're a closed or an open society. In an open society, debate is encouraged and freedom of expression is guaranteed and protected. In a closed society, by contrast, rulers shut down the pursuit of truth and dictate narratives, threatening any who defy them. This distinction is as relevant today as it was in 1922. Horton argued the post-World War I peace treaties would determine whether millions of people lived in open, progressive, or closed, regressive societies. The Turkish policy of Turkey for the Turks was a mistake. not just disastrous for the Christian minorities, but harmful to the Turks. Horton argued a diverse, multi-ethnic, inclusive society with civil liberties for all would be a great benefit to all Ottoman citizens. Indeed, he thought the Allies should have kept fighting to ensure the result. If the major powers had supported their small ally, Greece, Horton believed his point would be proven over time. And I believe he was right. Consider modern polling results from Muslim countries. The more homogeneous a Muslim country, the more its populace supports discrimination against minorities. So, if we believe tolerance and civil liberties are beneficial, Horton was right that heterogeneous Turkey would be better for Turks as well as Christians. Turkey's leaders believed otherwise, of course, and still do. They have been pursuing a policy of Turkey for the Turks and false narratives about their war or so-called war of independence ever since they burned Smyrna. So the differences between open and closed societies are still with us. Solomonidis was free to do her research in the Greek archives. Dalezio was free to do her research in British archives. And I am free to do my research on Horton in the US National Archives. And all that was regardless of whether the research results were flattering to the countries in question. To understand how research in Turkish archives is quite different than the Western norm, I encourage you to read Morris and Zivi's book on that subject. Thus, differences over the value of an open society are still with us, and yet another reason why Horton's arguments remain important for us today. Now, I'm going to stop here. I was planning to include a very famous speech that illustrates the points I just made, but in the interest of time, I will stop here and say thank you very much, and so we'll have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismini, and thank you all. And the questions can come from any one of you, any one of us. But let me start by asking a question of the presenters. Obviously, we're talking about Smyrna and what happened in the catastrophe. But as we said, the genocide started 30 years ago before the burning of Smyrna. It wasn't something new that was taking place. In fact, it was something that was taking place from the late 1800s. It happened certainly in eastern Anatolia in the 1890s, as it related to the Assyrians, and in fact, in that particular case, the Ottomans were using the Kurds. The Ottomans were using the Kurds in that particular time period to actually attack the Assyrians. My question is this: the genocide was a continual scenario. And what are the parallels today? In other words, what has really changed in the mind of the Turk? What has changed in the mind of the Turk? In other words, we talked about nationalism, and we haven't gotten into the philosophies of that particular time period, including the sociology professor Ahmed Gökalp, who developed this whole strategy of nationalism, where he found that Greeks, Armenians, were a foreign body in the national Turkish state, and they had to be gotten rid of. And we find that, for example, even after the exchange of populations, where you had still in Constantinople or Istanbul a substantial portion of the population being Greek, and in East Thrace, where there were Turks, again, now there are very few, maybe a couple of thousand Greeks in Istanbul, but the Muslim, Turkish, let's say Hellenic population of that particular area has thrived. What is going on with the people that, in fact, they continue that process of cultural also genocide? For example, recently in Hagia Sophia, and also in some of the other churches that they're demolishing. What has changed is my question to all of you. Peter, what has changed, Peter? Over the years, what has changed? No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Turn on your speaker.
Okay, can you hear me, Tom?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I don't think much has changed. I truly believe that nationalism is truly ingrained into the Turkish DNA, and it has been encouraged over the years. But what's happening now? Turkey at this point, it's 80 million strong, as opposed to at the time, Asia Minor, there was a census taken, I think it was 1913, with the initiative of the Greek government and the minister, the foreign relations minister, I forget his name, and in conjunction with the Patriarchate, they wanted to see what was the population of Asia Minor. And they came up with the number of 15 million. And out of those 15 million, about close to 5 million were non-Muslims. I mean, this is very important to remember that. And about 2.5 to 3 million were of Greek Orthodox, and the other 2 or 3 million were Armenians. Today, it's a different situation. Since then, Turkey has become a local power and has become very aggressive. Has been always looking at the Aegean, at the Greek islands, as being asphyxiating Turkey, and of course now they're actually testing Greece to see what they can get from this. On the other hand, we have to be careful that in the past, Greece has been victorious only when there was an ally. I am not sure at this point, Lou, and I think you mentioned it before, or somebody mentioned it, I think this morning, that I was listening to Cosmos FM, that in that neighborhood, in the Mediterranean, nobody is going to undertake somebody else's war. Okay, so we are alone in this, and that's why we have to be careful. Coming back to your original question, I don't think anything has changed, but now Turkey is finding the right time to become aggressive and actually claim islands and territory that doesn't belong to her.
Nico, what say you? What has changed over the last few decades?
If we are to judge by listening to what Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, is saying, I can argue that not that much has changed, actually. Why not that much has changed is because the political culture has remained quite similar, and it remained the same because so far Turkey, the political elites, the bureaucracies, has never been punished for the atrocities and the crimes that it committed, crimes against humanity. Starting from the genocide of the early 20th century, going up to the pogroms for the Greek population in Constantinople, and the atrocities they are committing today against Alevis, oppositional Turks, the Kurdish population, etc., etc. Let me just give you one information, you might not be aware of it. In the 1940s, the then powerful Republican Party of Turkey, the Cumhuriyet Halk Partisi, it was the Kemalist party, the party that Mustafa Kemal established.
Are we going to talk about the taxes? Are we going to talk about the taxes?
No.
Taxes.
No, because in the 1940s they imposed taxes on the Greeks that were like 179% to get them out of Turkey. On the Jews, close to 200%, and the same thing with the Armenians, 150%. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I was saying that in the 1940s, the Kemalist Republican Party of Turkey published a pamphlet describing the program and the policy of the party in the next 10, 15 years. And in one paragraph, this is in 1940, in one paragraph, they are saying that in few years, where we will be celebrating the 500 years of the conquest of Constantinople, meaning 1953, right? We must make sure, this is what the pamphlet is saying, we must make sure that Greeks won't be in Constantinople. We must exterminate them all until we celebrate the 500 years of
and they did, and they exterminated them in Constantinople, basically.
did it with 2 years delay. They did it in 1955, not in 1953.
Yeah.
So what I want to say is that this mentality, this political culture of conquest, of conquesting new lands, it's something very mainstream in modern Turkish political culture. I know it sounds very horrifying for people in the West, but it is what it is. And we have to explain this to the world. We need to analyze this phenomenon and try to deal with this. There are many ways in dealing with this problem. But for me, as an anthropologist and a political analyst that follows closely political developments in Turkey, I think that there is a serious problem of political culture. The bureaucrats, the political elites view themselves as a kind of superpower. They believe that Turkey is not only a regional, but also a global power. And I'm very afraid that very soon, in the next few years, Turkey is going to try to acquire nuclear weapons. And this is a very, very serious threat that the democratic world should address very, very soon. We should be very careful. And this has nothing to do with any kind of anti-Turkey sentiments. We want to live in peace with our neighbors. We want to collaborate. We have many common elements, cultural, etc., etc. We will be living together. But in order for us to live peacefully, in the Eastern Mediterranean, we need to have a democratic political culture in Anatolia and a democratic regime. Under this current regime, I don't see this as happening. It's a very dangerous situation.
Ismini, what has changed, Ismini, over the last few decades?
I must say, I concur with both Nikos and Peter. I don't think much has changed in the sense, why am I saying this? The governments have changed, the leaders have changed, the objectives, the policy objectives have not changed, and certainly not admitting to what happened in the past has hardened the hearts of the Turks, and it makes them more receptive, I would say, to illiberal beliefs, resistant to civil liberties, and much more inclined towards ongoing persecution of minorities. And we've seen this. We saw what happened to the American pastor Branson. It's a recent example. And it's been happening to a lot of other people, and we don't always hear about it. As you know, things are controlled. But it's certainly not helping the Turkish people to become a free, democratic party and an open society.
May I add something to this, Lou?
Yeah,
I was
please.
inspired by the description of Ismini. I mean, if you follow and analyze Turkish state propaganda, you will be amazed at how this propaganda describes Turkey and the Turkish population as victims.
Yeah.
And the Greeks, Armenians, and generally the West as perpetrators. Victims of what? Victims who lost their empire, their homelands. We're talking about a reverse irredentism, which is very, very dangerous because it's very legitimized and very mainstream in modern Turkish political culture and society. They describe themselves as victims. Imagine what the situation would be if Germans today would describe themselves as victims in the Second World War, and praising Nazi ideology. It's unbelievable. This is what is happening in Turkey right now and in the last couple of decades.
Let me ask all of you, another question, and it relates to a certain degree of what Peter said, that Greece to a certain degree is by itself. When you look at all the outrageous things that the Republic of Turkey has done, including invading another nation in terms of Syria, in terms of using mercenaries in Libya, in terms of thousands of overflights by their jets into Hellenic territories, by their drilling in the Eastern Mediterranean, in other areas, by, quite frankly, being an aggressive bully. Why isn't the rest of the world outraged by all this and doing something about it? Where is NATO? Where is NATO? where is the EU? The Hellenic Republic and the Republic of Cyprus are part of the EU. Why isn't the EU doing anything? Where is Germany? Where is Germany in all this? When we think of the alliance during World War I that was talked about earlier by Ismini in terms of the Ottomans with the Germans, where are the Germans in all this? Where is the outrage of weaponizing refugees and migrants in the borders of the Eastern Mediterranean and into Europe? Where is the outrage by everyone, including the United States of America? What is going on? Peter, what is going on?
I think it's the same situation, déjà vu, that we spoke today, which the topic was about the end of Hellenism. Look what happened. I mean, at the time there was a genocide taking place, and crimes against humanity, and that just the American ships and the French ships and the Italian ships, they stood by idle without doing anything. That's why we said, all three of us, we said before, nothing has changed. But of course, the whys, there's so many things behind the scenes that we don't know, the so-called secret diplomacy. But again, you see that if you compare between Turkey and Greece, of course, Turkey is a huge country, 80 million people, has a tremendous army, and there's a lot of political, economic, geopolitical interests. And last but not least, you said about Germany. Germany has been a traditional ally of Turkey. So why should they change?
Well, it's almost like 150 years, quite frankly.
Right.
And they supply them with military arms and all the rest of that.
So that gives you the answer.
Nico, what are your thoughts on this issue?
I think there are conflicting interests when it comes to Turkey in the United States and in Germany and in European Union in general. I have to add that Turkey has done an amazing work in lobbying in the United States, an amazing work. They have invested millions of dollars. The Greek side is not doing something similar. I want to say that I don't think that the Turkish army is that powerful as they want to portray themselves. Especially in the current context, I think the Turkish army is very, very divided and it's under collapse, as it is the Turkish economy. And of course, the Turkish society is very divided between, on the one hand, secularists, hardcore Kemalist secularists and Islamists. And of course, on the other hand, we have the Kurdish movement that is very strong and it's getting stronger and stronger. So I don't think that Turkey, yes, demographically, we see these 80 million people, but it is not a homogeneous, unified country that has a common vision for the future. There are serious internal divisions, and I don't think that this state that is based on the application, exercise of violence, even over its own citizens, I don't think that it has a future. And as I said, they have invested millions of dollars in the United States for lobbying. On the other hand, in Germany, Turkey has a significant influence because of the millions of Turks who live there. They have established associations, think tanks. They have created common projects and universities, etc., common business ventures and all these kinds of things. Greece does not exist. Greece is not active in Germany. So there are many things that we need to reconsider. And I think that Greece has to change its narrative and also its strategy and diplomacy towards Turkey and the approach towards the European Union. I do not think that we are alone in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece is part of an alliance with Israel, with France. And I think that the United States, certain circles in the United States are very supportive towards Greece, and they support the EastMed pipeline for natural gas. This is an amazing project that is going to contribute to stability. So I wouldn't say that Greece is alone. I find this statement a bit exaggerated. I think we have many allies in the region, but we need to be a bit more serious when it comes to our public diplomacy and our bureaucracy.
Nico, I don't disagree with you that we have so-called allies, but the reality is that some of these things that have been taking place for decades. These are not new issues. And in terms of Cyprus, for example, we're talking about from 1974, where
Yes.
people invaded another nation, have 30, 40,000 troops there, have
Yes.
brought in people from Eastern Anatolia and raised the population in the
Absolutely.
north, and no one has done anything. Kissinger saying it was fine to invade Cyprus, and in fact, the Turks should take over 1/3 of the island. I'm sorry, Ismini. Let me let Ismini continue the discussion on that issue. Yeah,
May
yes,
I
Nikos.
add something on the
Yes,
Cyprus?
go ahead, please.
However, nobody has officially recognized the occupied part of Cyprus as a Northern Republic of Cyprus. It's a completely illegal statelet. Nobody recognizes it. And this is something very, very important.
But the important reality is the reality on the ground. They still control 1/3 of the island. Ismini, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that you said, well, where are they? Where are all the big powers? Where is NATO and so on? It's a little bit like it was in 1922. For example, I'll give you an example with Lloyd George. The United Kingdom encouraged Greece to go ahead into Asia Minor, but then the support was no longer there. Why was not there? Why do leaders in other countries, why are they not interested in what's happening with Greece and the Aegean and so on? They have their own issues. For example, they do not want to get militarily involved. And that is a difficult area of the world to get militarily involved. They have to contend with their domestic political environment and people who are against them, and a lot of other issues that leaders, their time is taken by so many diverse issues, that whether they're domestic, they're international, it can be finances, and certainly lack of political support. There are many reasons that maybe they know about it and they do not give it a priority. And there are even leaders who do not know the history, they do not know the intricacies and the complexities of the conflict in the area. So.
All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say that regarding, I think the best thing would be to avoid being engaged into an armed incident, a hot incident, as they say, with Turkey. Because, and I tend to have a difference of opinion, that we don't want to test, because we don't know for sure that if we go to war, we're going to have a military ally. Maybe we have political allies right now, okay? But I'm not sure if we're going to have a military ally. I might be wrong, but at this point, I'm not sure. Now, one thing that I admire Mitsotakis' government that they're doing, I believe eventually they will engage into a dialogue. But they don't want, and I applaud them for that, they don't want to engage into a dialogue while the Turkish ships are within the Greek waters. They would demand that they refrain, go back, and then they're going to engage into a dialogue. And I think this is a very good policy, and I admire and applaud the government, today's Greek government, that they really taking this firm stance. And this is part of negotiations. You have to show the person that you're negotiating that you know something, I'm willing to negotiate, but it's not going to be under your terms.
Peter, I totally agree with you, and obviously no one wants to go to war, in particular on the Hellenic side. Whether anyone is going to come, and support them is a separate issue. My personal opinion is they're not. And, my thought is that sometimes, Peter, and I agree with you, sometimes you have no choice. Someone attacks you. It's not like you're attacking someone. Someone's attacking you. wants to take over your islands. As a matter of fact, they're showing maps on their walls that are showing those territories as being theirs. They're already in Cyprus. And some of the issues that we talked about in the genocide actually took place in Cyprus in the 1970s. And if they go into the islands, it's just going to be repeated. In other words, it's a repeated history. Let me just ask one final question. And I know there's many questions we can ask on this, and we can be here all day. But let me ask one final question, and that's about the money. That's about the money. When we think about when we talked about parallels between the past and the present, when we talk about the past, many people forget that besides the genocide, what was taking place during the genocide was the confiscation of other people's property. When we talk about the Christians that were part of the Ottoman Empire, that were quite frankly loyal citizens of that particular empire, they lost everything. And as a matter of fact, their homes were taken, their businesses were taken. So it was about the money. And even in 1922, following these issues, it was about the money. It was about oil again, because the Turks did say that if there was support on the other side, that they would head towards the fields, the oil fields in the Kurdish areas of what is now Syria. So what about the money today? In other words, what is this all about? Is it about the money? Is it about the oil? Is it about the drilling? Is it about the money? Peter.
Well, as I said before, eventually they will engage in some kind of dialogue. But of course, it's going to be under different terms. I am afraid that they will have to come to some kind of an agreement. I don't know how obvious and how known it's going to be to the public, but I'm afraid that they will come to some kind of an agreement about benefiting. In other words, to be a win-win situation between the two countries regarding resources that have to do with the Aegean, and not only. So eventually, and I hear it not only from the aggressive Turkish move, I hear it from Greek politicians. If you read between the lines when they write or when they speak, I hear it clearly, at least because, I listen to the Greek media every day. I have all the channels in my home. This way I can listen to all the different leaders from every different group. So I think there will be some kind of an agreement that both countries will have to come to an agreement to benefit from some kind of resources that have to do with the Aegean. And lastly, I agree with Nico that we are not against the Turks. I personally have some very good Turkish friends. I have
We all do.
Professor.
We all do.
I've gone to Constantinople 3 times, and I've met the Turkish people that come to Greece, and they're wonderful people. I have so much. We have so much in common, and it would be wonderful to be good neighbors and to benefit from this friendship. But unfortunately, this aggressiveness, it's dangerous. And dangerous for not only for Turkey or Greece, but this whole Mediterranean area there. And I hope they do come to some kind of an agreement that will be sane and that will be beneficial for both sides.
Well, we certainly hope so. Nikos, is it about the money?
Well, first of all, I don't see any agreement in the near future unless the Turkish side takes steps back and abides by international law and UNCLOS. I don't think that there will be any government in Greece that is going to sit at the table of negotiations to negotiate what?
Their islands. Negotiate their islands.
The militarizing.
Not the islands. I didn't mean the islands, Nico. I meant
But I don't see any dialogue, because the word dialogue sounds really nice. And this is a classic Turkish strategy. They create a military crisis, and then they call Greece and the international public opinion. They spread this propaganda that, now we want dialogue. True. But you are the side that creates the problem. You don't abide by international law, by the law of the seas. You don't recognize that. So what kind of a dialogue are we talking here? Now that's the one thing. The second thing, I think it would be a suicide for the European Union to give the keys of energy security of Europe to the hands of Turkey. Because what the Turkish regime is trying to do is to turn its geography. The government wants to turn Turkey into an energy hub that will control the flow of energy from Caucasus, from Middle East, from Eastern Mediterranean to Europe through Turkey. Now, if this happens, then Turkey is actually going to become a superpower, and this is not good for anybody. Not for Greece, not for Cyprus, not for even Germany and other European states, and certainly not for the United States and Israel. So I don't think that this Turkish state megalomania is going to lead somewhere good. I think that Turkey is going to face very serious internal problems with its military in the near future. And as I said in the beginning, I don't see any kind of dialogue in the foreseeable future between Greece and Turkey. I think that we might need to go to a kind of military confrontation. I'm against violence, I'm against wars, but what can you do in these cases? How are you going to defend your own country, your territories, your seas, right? I don't see many solutions for the time being, unfortunately.
Nico, as we speak, Germany is arranging the right atmosphere for the two countries to come to a dialogue. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope they never come to any kind of dialogue, but inevitably they will have to come, whether it's going to be obvious, whether it's going to be behind the scenes, like secret diplomacy. But at one point they will have to come to some kind of a dialogue. And I hope they don't give away any land or any islands or anything like
no
that.
matter what we hope as citizens and analysts, of course, there is only one topic to negotiate. It's about the delimitation of the zone, of the sea zones, right? Nothing else to discuss. But Turkey wants more. So that's the problem here.
Ismini, is it about the money? Was it about the money, and is it about the money?
This is a difficult question, Lou, but I'll tell you what I think in a different way Horton might say. Well, he was tremendously bothered by the fact that authoritarian, Ottoman, and later Turkish, and as we see now in the present Turkish governments, exploit European disunity. So I think that we should be thinking along the terms of unifying different countries or patrons or allies and so on the basis of common cultural and political values, rather than on transitory personalities, leaders, for example, or military interests, commercial interests, or even geography, as important as those are. Now, for Greece being a small country, does it need allies or patrons? Yes, but I think one lesson we learned from the 1922 catastrophe is definitely that you must negotiate clear terms of support and be well aware of them. So I think that's something that we need to keep in the back of our minds.
Thank you, Ismini, Peter, and Nico, and thank you all in the audience for attending this year's Smyrna Catastrophe Remembrance. And please join us next week for EMBCA's Warrior Arts of the Hellenes, from Ancient Times to the Modern Era panel discussion. We're going to do it in association again with the AHEPA's Hellenic Cultural Commission. The distinguished panelists are highly ranked martial artists. They include the president of the Pamahon Cultural Union, author and engineer, Kostas Dervenis, Pamahon instructor, martial artist, technologist, Eric Hill, including martial arts instructor, investment fund attorney, Peter Stavranindis, martial artist, international instructor of the Japanese Karate Association, Ilias Kazakias, and also martial artist Dimitris Horiatis, who's an international investment officer. For those who want to know more about EMBCA, you can go on our website, EMBCA.com. And also you can go on AHEPA's website, AHEPA.org. Thank you again all for attending. This was a great conversation. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nikos, Ismini. You're all wonderful. And we'll see you next week. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.